So why does GLP-1 act differently in obesity and diabetes than it does in other GI inflammatory states? Where I was thinking, well, GLP-1 is produced in the L cells in the intestine, so it seems like maybe they would be damaged and then not able to produce the GLP-1 with those inflammatory GI conditions, but that's not true. GLP-1 is produced in higher quantities in those GI inflammatory states. So what's going on here? So again, we know that GLP-1 and also the other incretin PYY are impaired in obese persons. So if we have an increase in the inflammatory blood lipopolysaccharide, increase in blood glucose, we have a systemic low-grade inflammation, insulin resistance, and then less of an impact or production of incretins like GLP-1 and PYY. And then we have increased appetite. So then we have more food eaten, and then we have more metabolic issues. Another way to think about it is to think about what's going on with the microbiome. So in a normal microbiome, you're going to have insulin sensitivity. You're going to stay in that adaptive barrier immunity. The gut will be sealed. And so that's a part of the barrier system. You'll have a decrease in inflammation and a decrease in cardiovascular disease risk when you have a normal gut microbiota. If you have a disruptive microbiota, that's part of what will lead to insulin resistance, problem with fat and fuel storage, the LDL and triglycerides, increased fat, inflammation, and increased cardiovascular risk. So the type of microbiota that increases and optimizes GLP-1 are short-chain fatty acids, 2-oleoyl glycerol, 2-OG, and these are fermented and digested fat metabolites. Secondary bile acids, so the primary bile acids are produced in the liver and then broken down in the intestines to become secondary bile acids. The lipopolysaccharides, which are metabolites of the intestinal microorganisms, and then indole, which is found in cruciferous vegetables. Those are the types of microbiota that increase GPL, and basically it's a lot of fiber, fat, vegetables, that your body needs to produce more GLP-1. So this is the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to eat food that has a lot of fiber, and you're supposed to eat food that is fermented or fermentable. So when you eat those kinds of foods, then your gut is going to work on them. And they're going to break down the foods into metabolites that have short-chain fatty acids, that have bile acids, that have that 2-OG, the fat, the tryptophan, and indole. And then those metabolites are going to be what activate the incretin system of the gut and cause the GLP-1 and PYY production to increase. So the short-chain fatty acids increase GLP-1 production. And these are fibers that are fermentable. And keep the gut sealed and healthy. Oligofructose also increases GLP-1 production. This is a prebiotic fiber that includes things like dandelion greens and asparagus, broccoli, kale, cabbage, onions, garlic, legumes, wheat. So these are good for increasing GLP-1, but if you have a FUT2 gene SNP, you want to avoid these because these generally don't work for you very well. So we're talking about diet. So you take in food, the microbiota breaks it down. You as a host are nourished by that, and that forms your preferences for foods, and it forms your metabolic state. So if you have a preference for a food that and you're dysbiotic, your microbiome is not helpful, that dysbiosis will make you want different foods because the bacteria will want to get fed, whether they're an optimal profile of microbiome or whether that's a dysbiotic one. They will call you to eat what nourishes them. And so that's part of the difficulty with preferences. And then that microbiome breaks down things and also is related to actually whether the food that you take in is able to be transformed into a bioavailable state so you can actually absorb it and get nutrition from it. So if you have adequate secondary bile acids, adequate short chain fatty acids, adequate GLP-1 and PYY, then you're going to have adequate insulin secretion. You're going to have low permeability. You're not going to have a leaky gut. You're going to have a bit slower gastric emptying and gastric acid so that you get full quickly. There will be little storage of fat in your liver, and your liver won't need to release sugar to augment your fuel. And you'll have increased energy expenditure, so you won't have to store fuel in your adipose tissue, and you'll feel full and not hungry. That's what happens when you have that balance in the microbiome. So fat, we keep coming back to, is one of the great things that not only fills us up and causes good GLP-1, but it actually increases the number of L cells. So, so L cell density in mice and subjects that were fed a lot of fat increased. And then that increases GLP-1 and improved L cell differentiation. So eating fat is important.